The way that's going to work this morning is I'm going to introduce our little gathering here, and I'm going to then pass the meeting over to my colleague Jackie DeLuey in the green and Ellen Brzezowski in the blue and pink. My name is Dee Dee Bartlett, for those of you whom I haven't met. I co-chair along with Jackie the New Canaan Domestic Violence Partnership. Our purpose today is really very simple. We want to help you and your kids deal with difficult topics, talk about difficult topics. And the catalyst, of course, for this was Jennifer Doulos' disappearance 4 weeks ago. It's left a lot of people in the village confused and concerned. A number of us here, Mary Fetchett, who is my dear friend and the co-founder and director of the Voices of 9/11, and Jackie and Ellen, a number of other people in the room. We've had several meetings with town leaders, and this meeting today is the result of that meeting. We realized, and Mary was one of the first, because Mary has been counseling families, thousands and thousands of families and individuals for the last almost 20 years on issues of resilience and care. And we realized that people in our town needed a format in which they could come and ask questions and receive some counseling. Hi, come on in. Good to see you, Erica. Before we begin, I want to be sure that you know the rest of my crew here. Ellen, as many of you know, is head of New Canaan Cares, and she's going to be introducing our two speakers. This is how our meeting this morning is going to run. We are not going to be talking about the case. This is an active crime investigation, and there's no member of the police department here, and we're not going to be talking about that. That's not the purpose of this meeting. The purpose of this meeting is for you to ask questions of our two expert speakers today. It's also an opportunity for people to ask questions and air concerns in a confidential way, or as one of my pastors, our pastors likes to say, in a safe place. This is a safe place, so we would hope that you would not blog about this meeting today. We would hope that this stays the way it is. I have turned off my cell phone. I would hope that the rest of you have already turned off your cell phone. Okay? So without any further ado, I want to pass this on to Jackie and Ellen, who will introduce our speakers, as well as the other resource people in the room. And we'll go from there, and then we'll be back later on, both Mary and I. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate it. I actually wanted to mention some services. We were purposeful in that we invited some counseling services and the Domestic Violence Crisis Center today. It looks like not everyone has shown up yet, but both Bordy Kurz, Director of Development at DVCC, and Janine Savini are both here, and she's a counselor at DVCC. They have great brochures and are available if anyone wanted to talk at the end. Child Guidance could not be here today, but those of you might know, in New Canaan, they specifically provide us with our 211, which is 24-hour emergency mobile crisis for kids. So I did bring their brochures. Definitely take it. They felt very bad. They had a professional development for their entire department today, and we just felt really terrible. They couldn't be here. Family centers, two of they're actually, Chelsea McGee, the manager of clinical services for Darien New Canaan, is coming along with Haley, her coworker. So they should be here at some point. And then Kids in Crisis, I'm holding their brochure.
She's on her way.
Emma Kate Friedman is going to be joining us, and she is our full-time teen talk counselor at New Canaan High. I did bring her brochures, but they also have a 24-hour helpline. They have a shelter. So all of these places are available for us all summer to get any kind of help. So we wanted to make sure that families knew about these services in town. And then I'm going to turn it to Ellen, who will introduce these amazing people. Okay.
Thank you so much for coming this morning. And I just wanted to let people know this is being streamed through New Canaan Care's Facebook page, but we are only getting the speakers, so nobody in the audience will be shown. So just wanted to give you that so you know for confidentiality reasons. Okay, so I have the pleasure of introducing our two experts who really are the best of the best in the field. So we are really very fortunate this morning to have them both here. So Dr. Frank Bartolomeo brings more than 30 years of behavioral health experience. He started when he was 12 in a myriad of roles and settings as a psychotherapist, executive manager, scholar, and organizational and program consultant. As Director of Behavioral Health Services and a member of the management team, he is responsible for the growth of existing therapeutic services at the Southfield Center of Darien and the implementation of new services and programs to better meet the needs of families around Fairfield County. Dr. Bartolomeo also has a private practice in Wilton. Tracey Masella is a licensed clinical social worker who graduated from the Fordham University Graduate School of Social Service. Ms. Masella has worked at Silver Hill Hospital in New Canaan since 2009. She is currently working for Silver Hill as a marketing consultant in addition to having a full-time private practice also in Wilton. While at Silver Hill and in her practice, Tracey has worked with adults and adolescents with a full range of diagnoses, including substance use disorders, personality disorders, and mood disorders. Most recently, Tracey was the program manager for the Adolescent Transitional Living Program at Silver Hill. Ms. Masella is also intensively trained in dialectical behavioral therapy, which is also known as DBT. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming.
Thank you.
So I think I can speak on behalf of Tracey that we're delighted that we were invited here today. We wanted to minimize the amount of sort of didactic or lecture kind of style by really beginning with asking people what specifically brought you here today and what are you hoping to leave with today when we wrap up. If we could go around and we could appreciate it. Jackie, if you want to start.
I know that, I myself had, just stress around what happened in town a month ago, and I know that all of my friends, I have family that live in town, and, they're hearing from their kids, they're just feeling very stressed, and it was triggering for other things that happened in their own life, with events like this. So I definitely think it's important to bring us together, kind of support each other.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Same for me. The Jonathan Munoz case has been just, very disturbing, and having it hit so close to home.
Mm-hmm.
Made me want to come speak on it today.
Thank you.
I'm in the same boat, actually. I'm shocked. I don't know if I'd say surprised. I think it can happen anywhere. In our town, it's hard to believe that it did, or it could. But I came for the same reason, and I know Dee Dee very, very well, and she said, come along.
Yes, I echo all those comments. I think that one of the things that saddens me is that we have to have an event like this to realize how vulnerable we are to the forces that shape an awful lot of people's lives around the country, and that domestic violence is such an integral part of American life.
I come from a couple of different perspectives. I think on 9/11 as an unprepared word to prevent the event. We were also unprepared to respond to the event. And our work with the families, responders, and survivors, we see that when a tragedy happens, no matter if it's a school shooting or a missing person that's presumed dead, that there's a lot of unspoken issues that individuals and families can be experiencing. And there's a lot of different stakeholders, for instance, the school, the town, the neighbors and friends that may need information and support. So when this happened, we're working with communities that are impacted by other tragedies, and I felt that we should be very proactive in really understanding first that the correct information is getting out, and that the community is aware of resources that are available to them. And certainly, your presentation today or being here today is a great first step on being proactive and understanding what people need and being able to respond to that.
I'm with Weston Youth Services, and so I was interested in being here because, of course, it touches Weston, it touches everyone. It's this really deep-seated thing to have a missing mom that's really scary for everyone and terrible. And so I thought I might be able to bring something back there. And also, obviously, it just relates to what, I like your title is sort of more broad, like just how to manage these things that happen. So
I am a member of Human Services Commission, and I also work on Elm Street, and have been approached by several people asking me, what do I say to my little one when he says, I'm scared to go to the park or something like that. And to support our staff at Human Services, I wanted to come and learn with them what we should be sharing.
Thank you.
I'm here with Human Services as well. I'm Bethany Zorro, a caseworker. So I just like to get the pulse of what's going on out there. I only see what's brought in, so it just the more opinions and comments and thoughts helps me help others. So that's why I'm here.
Kristen, I'm a Pierce board member and just want to be part of and I'm New Mom, so just want to be part of this.
Hi, I'm Paul Reinhardt. I'm the founder of the New Canaan Parent Support Group. And whenever Frank and Tracey speak, I like to hear what they have to say.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
My name is Bonnie Kearns, and I am sort of two-pronged here. I'm a resident of New Canaan, and with children kind of in the same age, a little bit older than this story. I'm also the development director at the Domestic Violence Crisis Center, so I am here really to sort of help participate in the conversation around services that are available and to continue to talk about preventive education is really a critical element, because we know at the Domestic Violence Crisis Center that this is a story that happens every single day. So while it's very shocking that it's right here and it's heartbreaking that it's in our town, this is the third person in Southern Fairfield County who's died from domestic violence this year, or sorry, who has been involved in what would be perceived as a horrific incident as a result of domestic violence this year. So we know that we have a lot of work to do.
Janine Savini, I'm a counselor at Domestic Violence Crisis Center, also a New Canaan resident. I wanted to meet the other professionals that were working in domestic violence, and while I'm on the crisis side, prevention is key. In fact, I was just at Grace Farms. They had, I don't know if any of you were, hello, sorry, I just saw your face right there. Stressing the need for getting in at the intergenerational family, and prevention is necessary. So just seeing how I can help and be part of the discussion as well.
My name is Emily Larkin. I work for the Community Fund of Darien, and we have families who are involved in the Canaan Country School and just looking for any resources I can bring back. I'm a huge fan of Tracey and Frank, and I saw their names on the flyer.
We're not going to be able to fit our heads.
Good morning, Karen Carvey from Grace Farms Foundation. Thank you for facilitating this. I think that as a community initiative director, we're thinking deeply about ways that impact our community, and that's from a local to global level. And unfortunately, this is an issue that touches us locally or globally. So it's important for me to tap into what are the needs of the community so that Grace Farms Foundation can adequately be a resource and support, and also sort of show our support, and also figure out how we can respond proactively with programming on the issues that are needed.
I am Kim Mcnamara. I'm a registered nurse and parent cares rep, also a groupie as well. I echo what the others have said so far. And I just wanted to say I took my daughter to Maine to be with my family for a month. And we were traveling the usual route and stopped at a rest stop and saw the missing person sign in Massachusetts. And my daughter was really taken aback by it, and I mean, it's so far-reaching, it's so everyday, really, unfortunately. And I think all of us getting education and talking about it is really crucial. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Hallie Riggs. I'm the program coordinator for the Denver Grieving Kids. I'm here today just to partner with and be in support of the community of New Canaan, and also offer any information I can about how we support children who are grieving. The Denver Grieving Kids works with children and families in Lower Fairfield County and in New York, and we also have a presence in 20 schools in Lower Fairfield County. So my hope is that we can be a support to your community. I'm Chelsea McGee, and I'm the manager of clinical services at the Center for Hope, which is part of Family Centers and the Denver Grieving Kids, echoing everything that everyone said, and just wanting as part of Family Centers and the Center for Hope to be, a resource and support. And these are conversations and topics that come up weekly for us. So while this is obviously somewhat different, just wanting to be here and support as needed and learn from all of you.
I'm Sally Clayton. I'm a college student at the University of Richmond, also a New Canaan resident, and currently a summer intern for Voices of September 11th. So I'm here for that mission, and also because I have also been impacted by the New Canaan tragedy. I'm curious to see how it's impacted everyone else and what measures are being taken to deal with it.
I'm Rachel Fox. I go to Bucknell University. I'm also an intern at Voices. And I'm just here to learn more about what we can do as a community to help prevent these type of tragedies.
I'm Rita Bailey. I'm the director of the nonprofit, the Darien Domestic Abuse Council. Obviously, I agree with everything that's being said here. What always concerns me after these things is there's all this conversation and then it's over and it goes away. And we seem to be, to use the expression, always preaching to the choir. It's how do we bring out the conversation? It needs to be, we need to start in kindergarten with the whole discussion of bad behavior. And, we like to work with New Canaan. I think we share a lot of the same ideas.
Hi, my name is Chris Otis. I'm here today representing St. Aloysius Catholic Church. Two things I do hope that you will address today, because I've actually had some conversations with some people of, moms who are in situations within their own households where they are estranged from their husbands. So perhaps you could address how those moms can make their kids feel at ease, how those moms get, there's fear out there. I think there's a lot of fear out there because we have a lot of families who are unfortunately in the same type of situation. We also at St. Aloysius are going to be doing a follow-up conversation on Sunday evening at 6 o'clock that actually Tracey, who is one of our parishioners, will be participating in, because when these things happen, we as a church want to bring faith into the matter. So our pastor, Father Rob Canale, and Tracey will be just facilitating a discussion. How can faith factor in to how we are handling this as a community? So that's why I'm here.
I'm Lonnie DeBoer. We're all with Voices of September 11th, just here to listen and learn, understand some of the common needs of the community, and where we and other professionals can help. We're always
We didn't need to repeat it 6 times.
Hi, I'm Donna Carson. I'm resident of New Canaan, and I came to hear and learn more about what's happening. And I think it's important to understand what resources are available for families that are undergoing stresses that maybe could be supported and maybe could mitigate these things.
Tinley Gilbert. I'm here wearing many hats. I'm a board member for CARES. I'm a parent in the town. And I'm a friend of a lot of women here in town. And so it hit me hard because I think we think we live in a bubble, but I know we don't. And the statistics are that this is affecting more women than I think we're willing to admit. So I'm kind of curious as to how to get resources as a friend. I don't know anyone who is, but it's a lot of things happen behind closed doors, and also as a mom, because my kids are seeing the signs up and they're asking a lot of questions, and I can tell that they feel like they're very nervous, that something's happening that they don't know about somewhere here.
Ellen, I am the executive director of New Canaan Cares, but I'm also a mom of 2 teens, one teen, one who's older, can't even believe it, and both of them sort of hear the news too, and I think for all children, they're worried about the safety of their own parents and themselves, and so I think when anything like this happens, trying to help kids feel secure and safe, and then also how do we support ourselves so that we can support our kids.
I'm finding myself deeply moved by what I heard people talking about. As people were speaking, a quote that's been attributed to Ernest Hemingway came to my mind. And he said that the world breaks everyone, and afterwards some are strong at the broken places. And my hope is that having conversations like this, we can feel stronger at those broken or fractured places. And I'm a big believer that part of what community can do when there are terrible things that happen is find ways of turning pain into purpose. So I just want to say, personally, I'm very moved by the number of community providers and residents who are here to provide support and connection, which is one of the key things. This idea of connection is one of the key things that we know helps mitigate some of the effects of terrible events or traumatic events in a community. So thank you. I heard a number of themes. I don't know what came to your mind, but
I think we wrote down the same thing. Just cheating and yeah. So I was also struck by the disparity between the wealth of resources we have in our community, clinicians, organizations, faith communities, concerned citizens, our local government, our police force, which has been amazing through this particular crisis, and how vulnerable we are because of this, as my mother would say, nobody looks like their Christmas card, right? So this veneer of perfection, right? How could this happen in New Canaan? But it does. And so I think that we have to first, come to some sort of acceptance that we are all vulnerable to bad things happening. That the statistics don't stop at the town border. That we are all under a tremendous amount of stress, and we were before a month ago. I work mostly with adolescents. I know you, Frank, you work with kids a lot. The amount of stress that our kids are under on a daily basis because of the lifestyle that they lead is unbelievable, and so far greater than what I dealt with 1,000 years ago when I was in high school. But even 10 years ago, how intense the pressure is in their lives. So we were vulnerable before this happened. This just exposed how vulnerable we are. So I think managing stress and anxiety on a daily basis so that when the crisis hits, of course, it's going to intensify, but it doesn't break people.
One of the other themes that I heard, because we're not going to get into any details of any specific situations, is really increasing awareness of the pervasiveness of domestic violence and its varied forms. And it's probably in communities like this some of the best held secrets. But it occurs, and one of the things we know about trauma is it has a tendency to trigger past traumas.
Yes.
So if someone has a history, and then hearing news reports of domestic violence, potential violence, that can trigger previous traumas, and so that people are reacting not only then to the current events, but past events. And one of the key things when we work with traumatic events is how do we reestablish a sense of safety? And we all need a sense of safety to move through the world. When we feel unsafe, parts of our brain and nervous system react and we go into survival mode. So a couple forms of survival mode, we go into what's called hypervigilance. We become acutely aware of all sorts of things. We're on guard, we're looking all the time. That's what we call hypervigilance. So our nervous system is actually activated. And that can alternate then with when our nervous system gets exhausted to drop down into what can look like depression, despair, numbness. So those kinds of alternations is a pretty typical response to traumatic events. So the first thing we have to do is how do we establish and reestablish a sense of safety? And that's true for us, and it's true for our children. And I would say that it begins with us. Because what we know is that anxiety is a very contagious psychophysiological state. So the first thing we recommend to parents is first address your own responses, your own sort of activated nervous system so that you can lend a sense of calmness to your child when they ask questions. Because that's what they're looking for. When we talk to children, I would recommend that we listen to the content of their questions, but more importantly, what is the music? Like right, even in this room, I can feel there's a lot of emotion going on here underneath questions. Children are having the same thing. What are typically children asking for? Am I safe? Can I trust others? Is the world safe? Because when traumatic events happen, those basic assumptions about self, other, and the world get challenged. So the first thing we do is how do we create safety? Kind of one thing we're doing is exactly what we're doing now. We're talking about it. We're getting together. We recommend getting back into normal routines as quickly as possible because that provides a sense of predictability and stability in our world. So those are a couple things we can do immediately to try to reestablish a sense of safety.
So I'm going to tell you a little story. It's fiction, but it's about managing fear. So fear and sadness are the two primary emotions that we feel most often. Okay, and when we feel the emotion of fear, our sort of innate or hardwired action urge is to run away. Okay, and so in a lot of situations, if that fear is real and justified, running away is the appropriate action urge. Anxiety sort of plays with that, and it turns situations that aren't really appropriately fearful into fearful or life-threatening events. So we tend to run away from things that are not in actuality dangerous. Okay, so that's what anxiety does. It sort of takes that fear response and puts it on steroids. That's that hypervigilance.
It's an imagined fear versus a response to a real or immediate danger. It's imagined, but the body is reacting as if it's real and imminent.
Right, so that fight or flight. So the brain cannot tolerate high levels of fear, and it needs to do something to mitigate that fear. And so often what we'll do, we'll either act in an inappropriate way, and kids do this a lot more than adults, right? So they don't often talk about their feelings, they often act out their feelings, okay? So keep that in mind. Or we will go into judgment, right? So let me tell you a story, and I think it'll illustrate this, and I'll try and keep this quick. So let's say that my boyfriend, we both work full time, and so he says to me, "Hey, I'm getting off of work early tonight. Let's have dinner. It's going to be a beautiful night." Of Great, I say. I know he loves salmon. I'll arrange my schedule. I'll go to the grocery store. What time can you be home? 6 o'clock. And let's assume that he's a guy that's usually on time. That is fiction. Let's just, for the sake of the story, say, okay, if he says 6 o'clock, it's going to be 6 o'clock, right? So I arrange my schedule, and I check in with him midday. Everything's still going okay at the office for you to get home by 6? Absolutely. See you then. Looking forward to it. I go, I get the salmon, I get some salad, I get home and I'm starting to prepare. I want the salmon to come off the grill right at the right time, and 6 o'clock comes, I'm taking the salmon off, and 6 o'clock goes, and then it's 5 after 6. And what's my first response? Well, you think it's that.
You're mad.
Anger.
You're mad.
You think it's anger.
You're concerned.
Worried.
Yeah.
I wonder if something happened. Huh. So I call his cell phone. We have cell phones now. How our parents dealt with this worry, I have no idea, because there were no cell phones, right? But I call his cell phone and it goes right to voicemail, right? Then I call his office. Doesn't answer his office, goes right to voicemail, right? So now I'm starting to get a little bit more worried. 6:10. So now I start to think about what might have happened. But that fear is intolerable. Like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to think about what might have happened. So I start to say what immediately came out, what a jerk. Like, who doesn't have their cell phone on? And why wasn't his cell phone charged? And where is he? What's he doing? Did he stop off and talk to somebody in the office? He knows I'm waiting. The salmon is getting cold, right? I go into judgment. I know nothing more at 6:15 than I did at 6:05. But I have moved away from that fear because it's intolerable, and now I'm mad. So he walks in at 6:15, and he might get the salmon in the face, right? If he had walked in at 6:05 when I was still kind of managing my fear, I would have said, oh my gosh, I was so worried. What happened? And he'd say, oh, there was traffic on the Merritt, right? And my cell phone, was in the back. I couldn't get to it, right? Totally different response at 6:15 when he walks in. I'm still worried, and I have no more information, but I have created this whole scenario to manage my fear, and it comes out as anger. And sometimes we do that with our kids. Well, I can only speak for myself. But sometimes we do that, and we're so afraid that our response to them looks like anger. And our kids are like, whoa, what? So it's really important what you said was we have to manage our own fear, and we have to be able to tolerate that, and we have to be able to say, I'm scared too, and we're going to be okay. But allowing for ourselves to acknowledge that this is really scary, and developing an emotional language with our kids where we can say to our kids, this is a scary thing, and we're going to be okay. But not to be afraid to identify the true emotion that we're feeling. And also to stay away from those anger responses that may make us act in ways that are not really appropriate. Right? So starting to, post things online that are really aggressive and angry, starting to say things to people that, out of anger. All of that, those anger responses are coming, that's our way of managing this intense fear that we have, and it causes other problems.
So anger is a response that helps us feel less vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And, there is I would make a difference between righteous indignation and anger. So, but, anger can help motivate us to take stances, to take positions, to move into prevention services. So those are active ways of using anger or indignation or a sense of injustice in an empowering manner that can also help us feel less helpless. One of the things that Tracey's alluding to is we're meaning-making beings. We're storytelling beings. In the absence of information, our minds create stories. And often those stories are wrong, And often if they're being fueled by fear, they can be quite scary stories.
And distorted.
And distorted. Our children do that too. Now, when you're dealing with a situation where there isn't information, there is the temptation to move into this storytelling mode. And as we know about anxiety, our thoughts can literally lead to physiological responses. So one of the difficult things is to stay with what we know and what the facts are. You know, and Tracey just pointed out in her story how quickly you can go from what you know at 6:05 and what you now created at 6:15. So in talking with children, you know, we recommend staying with what we know and avoiding, you know, the speculation, because that's going to become a wormhole that you're both going to get stuck into. I think someone had a question, you know, how do we talk to children? That will really vary on kind of the age that they're at. And in general, the younger the child, the more egocentric they are. Meaning they're really looking at, how does this affect me? So even if you have a younger child who's asking for details, the tendency would be try to get into too many details, but really what they're asking is, am I safe?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So with younger children, we recommend keeping details to a minimum and emphasizing that they're safe. Right? That in this home, you're safe, you're protected, I'm okay. So for younger children, those are the key pieces. And then stay with what you know. Kids are going into, and this happened, you can say, I don't know about any of that. This is what I do know.
And asking kids what they need from you rather than immediately trying to problem solve or assuming that this is what my kid needs. So sending those messages of, it makes sense to be afraid. It makes sense that you're scared. This is a scary thing. And we're going to be okay. What can I do to help you? Right? Letting them have a voice in this, not that this is a parent or an adult thing and you're the kid, right? And I'm going to tell you how you feel and what you should be doing. What would be helpful? I just need a hug. Or can I go out and play in the yard? Of course you can. Can we go around the house and can you show me where the locks on the doors are? Absolutely. Can we, I've had kids that they want to go to the police station and see, and talk to a policeman. Great, let me call the chief and see if I can and find somebody to talk to. Let them drive the conversation so that we don't go into more detail than what they need and actually create more fear, right? So those very basic messages of, I'm here, this is what we know, we're going to be okay, and what do you need from me, right? And creating a scenario in your house where you talk about emotions not just in the scary or bad or sad times, but that you're checking in and using emotional language with kids all the time, right? How are you doing today? What do we say? How are you doing, Frank?
Pretty well.
Pretty well. That gives me zero information. Right? I have absolutely.
You can tell I have adolescents, right?
Exactly.
They don't even tell me that.
Yeah, they grunt, right? Right? But that gives me no information, right? So, and that's a pleasantry. We all use that, right? That's a filler in conversation. I'm not suggesting we need to go around and say, well, I have a headache, and I didn't get enough sleep last night, and I'm really worried about this thing. I have to blah, 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 blah. We don't need all of that information. But when you're talking to your kid, you kind of want to know a little bit more than good or bad, right? So you want to create an emotional language in your house and say, let me tell you about this thing that happened and I was so angry, right? Or I was so scared, or I was so happy, or I was so sad. Using emotional language rather than good, fine, bad, okay. Those give us zero information about what somebody is experiencing. So really peppering our language when we talk in our families with emotion words, right? It's a little forced at first and you have to sort of think about it, but once you start doing it, it becomes pretty routine, right? And I know in New Canaan, in the public schools, they're really working on emotional intelligence. So your kids will be familiar with this. They may roll their eyes, believe me, but they're getting attuned to being able to observe and identify what their emotions are. So having that be part of the way that we speak in our families, I think, is really important. So that when something like this happens, they are going to be able to say, I'm scared, or I'm really angry, right? Well, that makes sense. Tell me more, right? But again, letting them drive the conversation. What do you need from me? What can I do to help you? Rather than immediately going into rescue mode, putting on our mom or dad cape and, rushing in to make sure they don't feel what they're feeling. Okay? Our emotions are really, really important. They're the way that our bodies and our very primitive brain communicate with us and give us information about what's going on. We shouldn't ever push away an emotion. It gives us a tremendous amount of information. And kids, Frank, I'm sure you can echo this, but kids will often come to you that if they're scared or lonely, and they will say, I have a stomach ache, or I have a headache. Right? We call the stomach the second brain. So a lot of times, kids will act out, or their body will tell the story that their words can't. So if your kid is coming to you with a stomach ache a couple mornings in a row, and you certainly want to rule out that they have something medically wrong, but if it doesn't seem like that, it's probably stress, it's probably anxiety, it's probably worry, right? So just taking a moment and sort of saying, what's going on? How you feeling? Other than in your tummy, right? And see if you can get to some of that worry, or just saying, hey, why don't we go and sit in the park for a little bit, and then you can see if you're well enough to go to camp or go to school, right? But picking up on those cues that they're giving that aren't necessarily I'm scared or I'm worried or I'm sad.
It's very interesting in the conversation around domestic violence, what you talk about going from fear to anger, because, and I'm not a counselor at all, but I'm talking just as a person. It would seem to me that when you can change from fear to anger, then you have control, right? So when he comes home and you're angry at 6:15, now you're controlling the situation, and all of a sudden he's on eggshells. Now he's in trouble, and it's an interesting kind of step to working with our children around being able to manage their fear before it hits anger.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think in my house, when I come home and I'm the 6:15 person, right? I'm the one who came home at 6:15, and I'm dealing with anger now. I have to spend the next 15 minutes coddling the anger or the disappointment. And this, I'm talking sort of in extreme cases, more hypothetical, but it is interesting in light of domestic violence, because the anger then becomes the controlling emotion.
Right.
As a defense against fear.
Right.
It's a defense against fear, but anger manifests into more things that become much more dangerous.
Yes. Yeah. Anger is usually justified, but it's rarely effective, right? So, the action urge, to go back to those, the action urge for anger is to attack.
Right.
Right? So, and when you attack, what's going to happen? You get attacked back. People don't usually back down from an attack. So it just starts this, it perpetuates the violence, right? Yeah.
Which also works on the other side, because the abuser is fearful he's going to lose control.
Right.
So of course then he becomes angry.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and anger is not...
Fear is the lack of control, so you turn it into anger, so you're in control again.
Right.
And anger is not bad in
Right.
itself. Again,
Right.
it helps us move away from victimization often.
Right.
Yeah.
It's what we do with it that matters.
Right.
So anger can be used to set boundaries. Anger can be used to be assertive. We're talking really like anger as a defense against acknowledging fear.
Right.
And if you
Right. But I'm saying, going back to the conversation around the children, like if I'm thinking in my own mind, if I can catch the anger and get it back to the fear,
Yes.
and say, darling, I'm very sorry that I was 15 minutes late. I
Right.
understand that scared you.
Right.
I see you as
Yes.
being angry, but I understand that it scared you.
Right.
Right.
Sort of backs it into
Right.
where it needs to be, right?
Right.
So
Right.
it backs it into acknowledging the real emotion
Right.
before they kicked it into anger.
Right.
The primary one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I had a question about the whole, like, asking the child what they need and offering reassurance, which makes sense. But then, you know, the very anxious child who's sort of just, it's a bottomless pit of reassurance. So you've showed them the locks, you've taken them to the police. And so I run into that a lot with parents, like talking about how they kind of reassure and it's just never enough. And where's that line to maybe sort of move away from reassuring about the specific fear?
Well, this is where if you have a pre-existing tendency, so if you have a child who tends to be anxious anyway, this is going to trigger that. And we know for, you know, the anxious mind, the more you try to reassure, sometimes it's just feeding the beast. And that's where sometimes taking action steps mean more than just offering, you know, reassurance. What can we do right now to help you feel safer? I'm not saying let's talk about it. I'm saying what can we do right now? You know, can we shift into doing something different? Right. So there is healthy distraction.
Right.
You know, so there are times when we say, let's focus. Let's, you know, to change a thought, move a muscle. Let's go do something different. Right. So they're not caught in that because the anxiety web is just feeding. So again, people have pre-existing. That's going to get triggered. And now we're dealing, just like with the trauma, if you have pre-existing trauma and something happens, that gets triggered, and now you're dealing with multiple levels of experience.
I have sort of a twofold thing that I'd like you to address. One is we are living in a much more dangerous world, and children have access to school shootings. They're seeing higher security in schools. They're not in a routine now because it's summertime. That's one part of it. The other thing is often the parents set the tone. So the constant exposure to the television on, and you only have to watch the news to see war, murders, you know, school shootings, and so forth. So you know, and I know they're not related, but they are related. So I'm wondering too, you know, what we can convey to parents about setting the tone for a safe environment where children are not overexposed to the media. And then how do you help a child that may be living in an unsafe home because there is domestic violence? So you're not conveying a message that's not accurate. I don't know.
How much time do we have? Well, the whole cell phone issue, right? That is, you know, that's our bread and butter. I think that setting the tone of not having your cell phones on, not checking them, not reading the news, you know, constantly, not turning your notifications off so that it's not pinging and buzzing every time there's a new, you know, news item, because it's all going to be sensational, right? I mean, they're developed to do that. So really saying, you know, and that's acknowledging, like, this is stressing me out, so I'm going to really put my phone away. Like, you're not going to see me with my phone. I mean, I'll check it in the morning for the basic news, and maybe again around dinner time, and then I'm not going to check. And really kind of set that limit and have your kids see that and talk to your kids. Like, I recently, about 2 months ago, I took my Twitter off of my phone because it was actively making me sick. And I said, I don't need this. There's nothing, you know, there's no value add in my life if I have it or don't have it. I've never been on Facebook. I don't do any social media. It's been so much better. I don't think about it. I don't go to it. It doesn't come up on my phone. I'm living a very, healthy and productive life. I don't miss it. And I told everybody in my family, like, I'm doing this. I'm off. Don't, and I think that sends a really powerful message to kids. Like, we don't need to do this. This is not a requirement for living that you are on. And at the same time, I recognize that Instagram and Snapchat are a part of our kids' lives. So we have to understand that. But in terms of the notifications and the constantly checking our phones, we can start to develop more healthy habits that the kids may or may not, be able to do themselves, but at least we can set the tone and say, it's okay. You can do this. At least in the house, right? Maybe when you're out with your friends, you got to be on your phone to be cool or whatever. But in the house, you don't need to be.
You're emphasizing at times like this, one of the ways that we help establish safety again is self-care.
Right.
So that's what you're modeling for your child. I need to do this for me. I need to set a boundary on myself in terms of how much I'm checking into things. Because I'm finding it's making me more and more upset.
Right.
Right. So that's healthy modeling of how do you engage in self-care during times like this. Shifting attention to, whatever the ways that people engage in self-care, going for walks, focusing the mind on also pleasant things. Those are all important pieces too, not just as a avoidance of it, but really we have to be able to take care of ourselves during times like this. It's a very important, part of establishing safety. Your bigger question about what if a child is already living in a home with, that's a whole different, there are a lot of domestic violence specialists in here. I'd probably defer to you all to talk about. That's a whole different piece because they may have never even have developed fundamental assumptions about the world, that the world is safe. They may already grow up with an idea that the world is an unsafe place. So which in a peculiar way can also make them less reactive to when things happen because, there are different, our culture, in our efforts to protect children often do them a disservice in helping prepare them for the, the darkness that's in the world. There was a time when children read stories like Hansel and Gretel and Red Riding Hood. Those stories, those were designed in some ways to start communicating to children at an early age that there are dangerous people, that there are people who can appear to be one way and be another. We don't do that anymore because we try to make the world look sort of much more, wholesome. But the downside to that sometimes is that when there's an event, the whole basic assumption about the world gets challenged. So I would say that sometimes children who are growing up in unsafe environments or community violence, in Bridgeport or New Haven, sometimes they have less symptoms because they've already grown up in a world where they're defended against violence and terrible things happening.
Right. Yeah.
I just have, to sort of piggyback on that, and sort of Chris's question in the beginning was for people who may be going through a divorce and maybe having some contentiousness, but not to the level of this case, how do you then communicate to your kids, okay, this is not going to happen here, and reassure them that this doesn't happen in every case of divorce or that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I think sticking to the facts, right? Yes, that that is happening to that family. And here's what we know about our family, right? Dad lives here, I live here, you see Dad these many times, you're with me on these days. Dad and I are not living together, and we are still, our whole purpose in life is to be the best mom and dad that we can to you. We don't have to be living together to care about the other person, right? All of that, and what do we know, right? So we know that Daddy works in X, Y, and Z, and really getting down to ground them in the reality that is their life, right? So they don't start to spin this narrative that really sticking to the facts and saying, okay, tell me about daddy. What's daddy like? What does daddy like to do, right? What do you do when you go over to daddy's house, right? What do we do here, right? Really kind of sticking to the facts and grounding them in the reality so they can always bring them back. Okay, my daddy, works in the city, or my dad is, and you want to stay away from like, dad's a good guy, he's not a bad guy, right? You want to really kind of build a factual way of describing your family so that they can go back to that.
I mean, if you think about it, if half marriages end in divorce, this is a pretty rare instance, right? So somebody's even pointing that kind of thing out.
Like
but again,
school shootings.
if you have a parent, or typically a father, if he's engaged in kind of controlling behavior or intimidating behavior, this is all going to get activated in a very different way. And for those children, they might need more intervention, because again, they're responding to the current event, and they're also responding to previous experience. The trauma gets reactivated. So for those children that we know have been exposed to domestic violence, they need special attention.
Right.
I think one of the most important things is to tell them it's not their fault, because they become impacted. The other thing with children, because the rise of teen dating violence is so high, is children need to be taught self-esteem. Their body is very precious, not to the extreme, but always that they don't deserve anyone to mistreat them, whether it's a boyfriend or whatever, because this is happening more and more, and from very normal families, because a lot of kids don't know what violence looks like. So they're as susceptible as a child who comes from an abusive family.
Right. But 1, 2, 3.
Lots of questions, but I'll focus mostly on, I think, education and prevention. So, I remember through CARES learning about the domestic violence partnership and the opportunities that were in town for people. And I remember being, I'm going to be honest, shocked. I was like, oh, we have those resources in our town? I just didn't know. I don't avail of them, but I didn't know either. And I wonder if there's more we can do to educate our community members about these resources. All of these people sitting at this table, I feel so lucky to be sitting here right now. And I think that there's a little bit more that we need to do as a community to help people understand what resources they have and that they're confidential. And then separately on education, and you brought this up a little bit too, having a teenage daughter who's not on social media, but did have an experience once where a boy in the school sent her, I don't even know how, I think a text, because she has an iPod. And I happened to just read it. And I was like, you think this is not an appropriate communication to receive from someone? And it elucidated to me that I hadn't started, she was only 12, I hadn't started yet, we tell her we love her and that she's, but we haven't yet started to try and give her those protective skills about how to not fight back, but communicate back, block, etc. Well, we did start doing that. But it shouldn't take her receiving, I don't know, she had 4 hours to let that text simmer in her head and think about it before, and what if I never caught the text, right? So I just think that there's, to your point, really at a young age, and maybe that'll help us as they grow into adults, we just need to do more with our children as well. And I think I'm a well-meaning parent, and I'm very communicative with my children, so what's happening to 90% of the kids or 80% of the kids who aren't getting that level of support?
Let me just take your first point, because I think that came up at an earlier meeting in terms of educating people in the town about all of the resources that are available that you see in this room and those that you do not even see in this room.
Right.
The town's website is being enhanced, and those resources will be listed. That is not the cure-all, but at least it is a beginning of getting the word out about a lot of help availables that were not in one place before.
And may I suggest there's 2 women in town who do the Welcome to New Canaan outreaches, and it's usually around communicating what roofers are available. But may I suggest that you also link with them, because what they do is they look at who's moved to town, and this happened to me, and they reach out to you within your first week. Oh yeah, and they have a bag of resources that they do, and it's usually, again, mostly people that want you to use their painting or their roofing services, but we're trying to get more information there, and like Newcomers Club might be another way to really reach out to people and even do a partnership with them on a couple events, because I do think that would be really, we focus so much on the great things about the town, and this is a great thing about the town, but we need to, and so we need to elevate these resources. Thanks,
I want to
Dee
say
Dee.
one other piece about the education, someone who worked with men who batter, the actual physical violence is only one piece of the behavior. There's a whole range of controlling behavior that, or even how you're spoken to, that needs to be addressed. I work with a young lady who, her boyfriend follows her on her cell phone. He's tracking her all the time. And that's a form of control.
It's very common.
Right? And you're not here. Where are you?
Your
supposed
phone
to be
wasn't
here.
on, your location wasn't on.
That's controlling behavior. And that kind of behavior can escalate because a lot of these men are terrified of being abandoned. They have a little baby self that is terrified of losing control. And if they start feeling threatened in that way, the behavior tends to escalate. So I would say that part of
anger.
Right. Well, I would say that part of the education is that there's a range of what we call controlling behaviors. And they tend to then, if those don't work increasingly, then we see actual physical violence. But there's a whole range of emotional violence and controlling behaviors that have to be addressed, that we're seeing more because of technology of expecting people to respond immediately when they get a text.
Right.
I've worked with people who are, a boyfriend or girlfriend will get enraged if there's not a response within 30 seconds because they've grown accustomed to that. And if you're not doing it, you're not paying attention to me, you're with somebody, those are all kinds of, issues that we have to educate, our teenagers about.
And also that, that men can find, I'm putting a shout out for the men in the room, that men can be in controlling situations as well, that this is not just predominantly male domestic violence, but women can put their families into abusive situations as well. So, and I would say that, when in part of our training, and if you're a nurse or a teacher, a counselor, you're considered a mandated reporter. So we have an ethical obligation that if we become aware of any situation that is potentially dangerous or harmful, we are ethically bound to contact authorities and move to do something. And I think that I take that very seriously. I know Frank does. I think that we sort of all need to think about ourselves as mandated reporters, right? And to say, like, if I see something and it doesn't feel right, trust your gut and talk to somebody, right? Talk to your priest. Talk to a friend that you know is a counselor or just talk to somebody. And not just say, ooh, I shouldn't say anything, that's their business, and I don't want to get involved. I understand it's hard and it's scary. And if we all, if we want to really be a community, that's what we ought to do. We ought to take our responsibility as community members very seriously.
And hopefully just the showing in this room proves that there are people here who can answer those questions.
Absolutely, and completely anonymously. And you never, I have called DCF so many times, and they don't necessarily know my name. They know that I'm a mandated reporter, but so anyway, that's my little plug.
The Grace Farms Foundation person had a question.
Yes, and then
this is sort of more from my mom of two boys hat, but just wondering to the extent to which using these moments to pivot towards addressing behavior in our sons and saying what their responsibility, or to your point, in our children, or should that be separate and apart? Because now our older son knows what's going on, and is response to, I'm hearing all of your amazing advice, is this also a moment to say, this is actually not how we love people? Or should that be separate? Is there value in tying those conversations together? Or is it?
There is, because you're tying it to your own values.
Right.
So it prevents it, anytime you have an opportunity to talk about the values of your family or your community, take it. So if there's an option like this, and you can say, here's an example of someone treating someone in a way that is totally opposite of what we believe in. Why not take take advantage of that. So I would support it. So when you talk about your values, keep tying it into that.
At the Friday night session at Grace Farms, that showed this continuum around power and control. And I found that fascinating because I think just as this concrete resource, beyond saying that there's all of these community resources, this actual tool where people are either self-identifying in, regardless of what partner they are, I just found that really clarifying to sort of, to spark conversation.
What did you present, the power wheel?
Yeah, the power and control wheel,
Do people
showing
know what
all
that
the
is?
different forms of abuse.
Right, because I think that there's all of those kinds of control that happen, and I just think it's easy for us to say a particular style. That's not it, but there's a lot.
Well, it's very, I mean, if I show a client coming in the power and control wheel and they just look at it and go, oh yeah, and they were not aware that this, you know, maybe verbal abuse is actually abuse. So, and those are the emotional and the verbal abuse. The little things that happen on a daily basis are much more damaging than the, you know, the physical. A lot of women will say that I wish you would just hit, like, you know, I can handle that, but
psychological piece.
Yeah.
Going back to what you were talking about as all of us being mandated reporters, I just wanted to share that the Domestic Violence Crisis Center has a 24-hour hotline that goes directly to our counselors. And while we do all have great resources here, sometimes it's easier to call a hotline and just ask, is this what I think it is? Because as we know, domestic violence is very, people are very private about it, especially in our communities. They will absolutely not share it because we do have these lifestyles that we, you know, we want to be perfect on Facebook, we all do, or in the Christmas card. And but Domestic Violence Crisis Center also has full legal services from arraignment to all the way through divorce and custody and alimony. And then a very important element is what we call sustainability, which is when we work with the client through getting themselves on their feet. So going back to the various kinds of abuse, some of our clients have never had a job, not because they weren't highly educated, but because they weren't allowed to. This is controlling marriage. They didn't have a bank account, they don't have resources, so they feel that they can't leave. That's the beauty of control, right? He controls her to the point where she can't leave. And so our sustainability team works with them through job opportunities, housing opportunities, and things that will get her on her feet so that she can move forward.
Yeah, so one of the things that women or men will say is that they, maybe they wanted to leave for a while, but they didn't know how. So I think in terms of getting the message out in our community, there's a lot, well, we do know our legal team will say they have 100 arraignments in Stamford and Norwalk every week. Those are the ones that are being reported. But there's a lot more that goes on, and if you're in this domestic violence situation, you don't know. You might want to leave, but you don't know how. So if you knew that there was a place that could help you not that we give anybody money, but you know, help as a support to like finding housing, budgeting, all that kind of stuff.
We have to penetrate shame and stigma. I think that's what prevents system from coming out.
And so I mentioned that Dee Dee Bartlett was a founding sponsor of the sustainability program.
Well, there's a common sense aspect to this. We know that women stay with abusers for a lot of reasons, primarily because of economic issues. She needs a roof over her head, she needs to feed her kids, and this happens all over the world as well as in this country. So being able to provide her with the means to support herself enables her to get out of this dreadful situation, enables her to liberate her kids and to start a new life. So thank you very much. I wanted to probably ask maybe the last question because I know we can't keep you here all day, much as we would love to. But it comes to a point that I think a number of people have raised, and it concerns bullies. Okay. Once again, going to the facts, what we know from the court documents, okay? There was bullying going on in this very, very tragic situation, and a lot of controlling behavior. One of the things that I'll be doing with all the pastors here in New Canaan is a second annual domestic violence workshop. It'll be in September. Father Rob was magnificent last year in enabling me to get the first one off the ground. The second one will be devoted to bullies, especially bullies as they are in our schools, teenage, high school, junior high school, below. How, in your experience, do you deal with children who exhibit bullying tendencies? And what's the cure?
Oh, look, we're out of time. I'm gonna throw that to you.
Well, I don't know if I'll address the cure part.
Yeah.
Bullying is a disorder of power.
Yes.
And a high percentage of bullies were once bullied. Again, it's that kind of defense against vulnerability. I will protect myself from vulnerability by victimizing others.
Yeah.
So typically, if I'm doing treatment with a kid who bullies, the first part you have to stop the behavior, right? So that's the first part. It's behavioral. It's behavior therapy. Stop the behavior, and then we start working with, understanding and helping him be more vulnerable and tolerate his own vulnerability. And often that means, and that can then lead to having greater empathy for, because he hurts, he wants others to hurt. So that's how I tend to approach it, that it's helping, and it's very, we still have, even in this age, a form of socializing men that still is against allowing men to be, vulnerable. You call it toxic masculinity. It certainly was very different in when I was growing up, and certain behaviors were just not tolerable in men. Crying was not a tolerable behavior. And so that still exists, and it's still communicated via sports and other kinds of things, that it's not okay to feel weak. It's not okay to need others. In fact, when I do treatment with men, the first thing I do is I say, let's talk about everything you've learned about what it means to be a man. And I'll write that down on one side, and I'll say, and let's talk about everything what is going to be required to be in therapy with me. They tend to be contrary, right? But that's how we start creating space, to have discussions about socialization and masculinity and all of that. So it's a broader question about how young men and boys are still socialized in terms of what it means to be a man. So I don't know if that answered the question, but that's the best.
Well, it's a critical question because, as one of my friends at DVCC used to say, bullies are batters in training. So it goes to the heart of so much of what we have all discussed here.
Yeah.
And our role modeling is still old school.
Really? Yeah.
A lot of what we've talked about today, we've talked about self-care, we've talked about modeling self-care, we've talked about asking for help if you're uncertain about, is this typical or not? I know that's something we deal with a lot of kids in crisis, right? Like, family conflict is very normal, especially with teenagers and parents, but when it's escalating, is that typical? What do I do? What services are available? And the question of what do we need to be doing, and look at all these services that we have. And I think all those themes that we've talked about today are certainly connected. So I guess my question is, what can we do with that as a group? How can we take it out of this room appropriately as clinicians, as neighbors, as community members, so that we can help each other and heal from this?
Before we get to that, because I think that would be a great way to end, to maybe be some action steps, but I just wanted to say a couple of things. One is that you have to meet people where they are. And very often people that are in situations like domestic violence or abuse or mental illness or substance abuse are not ready for help. So you could be giving them as a peer, as a counselor, as a teacher, as a head of an organization, you could be giving this person the most sound, reasonable, up-to-date advice, and they could not take it because they're just not ready. And we have to be humble enough to say, that's all I can do right now. There may not be a cure. There may not be an end to this that isn't, the prognosis might be quite grim for some families. We can only do what we can do, and we have to be humble enough to know that people have their own agency, and they come to help when they are ready to get help. So just keeping that, you know, even though you have access to resources and you do offer help, you know, I always get a kick out of, I will be working with somebody for months and months and sometimes years, and one day they'll come in and they'll say, it all came together. I had my aha moment, and I'm sitting there saying, this is great, this is great. And they'll say, you know, my best friend read me this quote that she found online, and it made so much sense. And the quote was exactly what I had been saying for months and years, right? It doesn't matter. This isn't about me, right? It's not about me being the one that got her to that quote, right? Or to that understanding. And you say, thank God, that's fantastic. I couldn't be happier. So really having some humility when we give advice, that it may not be taken, even though it is the best advice that person could ever receive. And the other thing is to, in situations such as we're dealing with in town right now, to not minimize your own trauma. To not say, well, mine's not that bad, I can't even talk about it. Like, you know, this is nothing, I'm not going, you know, it's nothing in comparison to what that family is going through. Trauma is trauma. And if this situation brings up and feelings and behaviors, and this is the time, then that is a wonderful thing. That is a wonderful thing. So don't minimize your own trauma or somebody else's trauma. When you hear that, like, well, it's not that bad. It's not as bad as, is still bad. So, I wanted to.
Hi. In terms of thinking about action steps, you know, I'm thinking a lot about, and we discussed this a lot, that unfortunately we just don't have control over how every child is being parented and what information they're getting at home. On conflict resolution and how to solve problems. You know, in school, when someone doesn't understand math, we work really hard to help them get it.
Right.
And when a child doesn't understand how to be safe with others, we penalize them. And so there's a growing movement in Connecticut around restorative practices in schools and creating a climate where kids can understand who was harmed and how to make it better. And I think it would serve New Canaan really well as the other school systems in Connecticut around understanding how to teach social and emotional intelligence to kids.
Yes. And to recognize that it's not the teacher's responsibility. They have so much on their plates, and that's dictated by this town, right? I mean, I don't know how teachers get through the curriculum that they're required to. So yes, and we need as a community to say this is important to us as a community, and we're willing to put some money behind it and get more people like Emma Kate into, and you guys into the schools. It doesn't have to be, you know, there are so many agencies and so many people that are trained that could go into the schools, even if it's part-time. But we as a community have to say it's important to us.
Joanne Fernberg manages all of the bullying complaints in the state of Connecticut, and I just went to
one person, imagine
training.
that.
Yeah.
One lady, can you imagine? I just picture her like papers everywhere.
She is a force. She's pretty amazing.
Wow.
And she just led a training on how to help kids have these conversations in school, and it was the best professional training I've attended. So I think she would be an asset to the community.
Great.
Thank you.
Joanne?
A quick corollary to what this point, vis-a-vis the schools, you mentioned in the beginning that schools are introducing workshops or concept on emotional intelligence. Where does it happen? Elementary or middle or high school?
All yeah. Yep. It's they're working with Mark Brackett from Yale, and they rolled it out in the middle school and the elementary school, and now it's going to the high school. So they've got a.
Were trained this year. The high school staff were trained.
Yep.
And it's rolling out in the high school for the students this coming year.
Yeah.
It's as a parent who has kids throughout the system, I'd say that the tools they're coming home with they're not perfect, right? Because they can only do so much, but they do help start the conversation and make them aware.
I'm not sure if, and I don't think so, New Canaan public schools have, because we offer